Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Rahul and today in this episode we'll talk about aperture. So aperture value defines the size of the aperture and there is an inverse relationship between the aperture value and aperture size. If the aperture value is small like f1.2, f1.4, then the size of the aperture will be big. While if the aperture value is large, then the aperture size will be small. Now we'll talk about how do we set the aperture values. In the older lenses or the manual lenses, we have an aperture ring on the lens through which we can change the aperture size. But in the newer lenses, we do not have any such ring and we have to change the aperture size through the camera settings. So aperture value greatly affects two things. One, the amount of light, and second is the depth of field. Depth of field in other language we call it as the blur effect or the bokeh effect. So moving ahead with the first point, and that is how aperture affects the amount of light. Since now we already know that there is an inverse relationship between the aperture value and aperture size, we can easily understand this concept. That is, smaller the aperture value, bigger the aperture size, and which means more light entering the lens. While larger the aperture value, smaller the aperture size, and this means less light will enter the camera. So let's understand this with a simple example. This image is taken at an aperture value of 3.5. Focus on the lighting of the image, while this image is taken at an aperture value of f11. Now compare how much light is falling on the first image and the second image. So you will clearly understand that the light entering and hitting the sensor in the first image, which is taken at an aperture value of f3.5, is much higher compared to the second image, which is shot at an aperture value of f11. Now we will understand how aperture affects the depth of field, that is the blurriness or the bokeh effect. So let's examine this with an example. The first image is shot with an aperture value of f3.5. So we can clearly see over here that the background is a bit soft, that is, it is blurred and the subject is in focus. While moving ahead with the second image, which is shot at an f value of 11. So over here you can clearly see that both the background and the subject are in focus. So now you can understand how aperture affects the amount of light entering the camera and the depth of field. Now, if you want to click a portrait image of a subject and you want the background to be blurred, in that case, you may use a lower aperture value, which will give you a shallower depth of field. That is, the background will be blurred. And if you want to click a landscape photo and you want everything to be in focus, then you may use a higher value of aperture, which will give you a deep depth of field. That is, everything will be in focus. Well, if you like this video, go and hit the like button, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Thank you.